The wind was a blade against the cabin walls. Ilara pulled the thin wool blanket tighter around Leo's shoulders, her own body a feudal shield against the drafts that snaked through the chinks in the logs. 7 years. 7 years she had fought this cold, this isolation, this gnawing fear that lived in the hollow of her throat. Leo coughed, a small dry sound that tore at her heart. He was so small for his age, his hair the color of winter moonlight, his eyes a startling pale gray. He was her world, the reason she woke each morning to set snares and chop wood with aching arms. He was the son of a king who did not know he existed. She was an exile, branded a traitor, cast out from the Silverwood pack with nothing but the clothes on her back and a secret burning in her womb. They had driven her into the Frostfang Mountains, a death sentence for any lone wolf, let alone a woman carrying a child. But she had survived. She had learned the ways of the mountain, the bite of the frost, the silence of the snow. Her hands were rough, scarred from splinters and frostbite. She traced the faint silvery mark on Leo's shoulder as he slept, the dormant crest of the Alpha King, a sleeping wolf, curled beneath a crescent moon. Theron's mark. A man she had known for a single stolen night of impossible warmth before her world had shattered. He had been visiting their pack, a diplomatic tour. He was power incarnate, a king whose presence silenced rooms and bent the will of lesser alphas. And he had looked at her, a nobody, a low-ranked she-wolf with nothing to her name, as if she were the only person in the world. One night. That was all it had been. And the next morning, the Alpha's daughter was found dead, and Ilara was discovered with a bloody knife in her pack, planted there by hands she could not prove. The pack's chief advisor, a slick, ambitious wolf named Valerius, had pronounced her guilt with a satisfaction that chilled her to the bone. Banishment was a mercy, he had claimed. She had run, and in the unforgiving wilderness, she had discovered the life growing inside her. A miracle, a curse, a reason to live. A howl split the night, low and long and close, too close. Ilara froze, her blood turning to ice, not the howl of a mountain wolf. This was disciplined, a pack, a hunting party. She had grown careless, staying in one place for too long. The relative safety of her hidden valley had made her soft. Leo stirred, his gray eyes fluttering open. "Mama?" "Shh, sweet boy," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. She scooped him into her arms, his small body trembling. "It's all right. We're just going to play a hiding game." She grabbed her worn leather pack, stuffing in the last of the dried meat and a water skin. Her movements were frantic, clumsy with fear. Another howl answered the first, this one from the other side of the clearing. They were surrounding her. They were coordinated. They were royal wolves. She knew with a certainty that stole her breath who had sent them. The cabin door splintered inwards, exploding into a shower of wood and snow. A massive gray wolf stood in the doorway, its eyes glowing with a faint silver light. It was a royal guard, its fur bearing the same faint markings as the brand on Leo's shoulder. It didn't growl, didn't snarl. It simply watched her, its head cocked. More wolves materialized from the swirling snow, their bodies huge and powerful, their silence more terrifying than any aggression. They formed a semicircle, trapping her. There was no escape. Then he appeared. The air grew heavy, charged with a power that made the hair on her arms stand up. King Theron stepped through the shattered doorway, ducking his head to clear the frame. He was larger than she remembered, broader in the shoulder, his presence a physical weight in the small cabin. The 7 years had carved new lines of hardness into his face, but he was still brutally, terrifyingly beautiful. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, swept the room and settled on her. She clutched Leo tighter, trying to shield him, to hide the mark on his shoulder, an impossible, foolish gesture. Theron's gaze was cold, utterly, unnervingly cold. There was no flicker of recognition, no memory of the girl he had held in his arms for one warm, secret night. He looked at her as if she were a piece of furniture, an obstacle. "The boy," he said. His voice was deeper than she remembered, a low rumble like stones grinding together. It was not a question. It was a command. Her own voice was a pathetic squeak. "Who are you?" A stupid lie, but the only defense she had. A flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps, crossed his face. He took a step forward, and the floorboards groaned under his weight. The air crackled. He stopped a few feet from her, his sheer size overwhelming. He didn't look at her again. His entire focus was on the child in her arms. Leo, brave and terrified, peeked out from behind her arm. His pale gray eyes met Theron's stormy ones. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The king's cold mask fractured. Just for a second. A tremor of shock, of disbelief, of something so profound it seemed to shake his very foundation. His gaze dropped to the sliver of skin visible where Ilara's blanket had slipped from Leo's shoulder. He saw the mark. The air left the room. The silence was absolute, broken only by the whistling wind. "Mine," Theron breathed. The word was not possessive. It was a statement of fact, a realization that echoed with 7 years of loss he hadn't even known he'd suffered. He reached out, his hand large enough to encircle Leo's entire head. Ilara flinched back, a hiss escaping her lips. It was a mother's instinct, primal and fierce. His hand stopped. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and a ghost of memory flickered in the depths of his eyes. He saw the worn dress, the scarred hands, the defiant terror in her face. He saw the woman from Silverwood, the one who had vanished, the traitor. His expression shuddered again, the ice returning, colder than before. He had been betrayed. He had been lied to. A son. He had a son, raised in a hovel by a criminal. "You will come with me," he stated. There was no room for argument. "Both of you." Fear warred with a desperate, protective rage inside her. "No, you can't. He's my son." "He is the heir to the Northern Crown," Theron countered, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "And you are his mother. You have a place for now. Do not make me take him from you." The threat hung in the air, more chilling than the wind. He could do it. He could kill her and take the boy, and no one in the world would stop him. She looked down at Leo's trusting face, then back at the king's merciless one. She had no choice. She had been running for 7 years, and the hunt was finally over. The journey to the citadel was a blur of cold and fear. They traveled in a closed carriage, the royal guards, a silent, imposing escort. Theron rode alongside on a massive black warhorse, never looking at them, a remote and terrifying figure against the snow-swept landscape. Ilara held Leo, whispering stories to him, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. He was quiet, overwhelmed by the sudden upheaval, his small hand clutching her tunic. He kept glancing out the window at the formidable man on the horse, a look of awe and confusion on his face. The citadel was a fortress of black stone and ice, clawing at the sky. It was a place of power, not warmth. As they passed through the gates, servants and guards stopped and stared, their faces a mixture of shock and suspicion. Whispers followed them like ghosts down the long, cold corridors. Their chambers were opulent, larger than her entire cabin, with a roaring fire and furs piled high on the bed. But it felt like a cage, a beautiful, gilded cage. Theron appeared in the doorway that evening. He had changed into dark, severe clothing. He looked every inch the king. He didn't enter the room, just stood on the threshold, his presence filling the space. "He will have tutors, healers, training," Theron said, his gaze fixed on Leo, who was asleep on the bed. "He will be raised as a prince." He is a child, Ilara said, her voice quiet but firm. He needs his mother, not tutors and training. He needs to be strong, Theron replied, his voice hard. I will not have a weak heir. The unspoken accusation hung in the air that her raising him in the wild had made him weak. It was true he was often sick, his constitution fragile, but he had a spirit of iron. And what of me? She dared to ask. His eyes finally met hers. The coldness in them was a physical blow. You are the mother of the heir. You will be provided for. You will remain in these rooms. You will not speak of the past. To anyone. This is not a reunion. This is an arrangement. He was building a wall between them, brick by icy brick. He was sealing himself off. Why? The word escaped her before she could stop it. Why are you like this? That night, you weren't like this. A muscle jumped in his jaw. That night was a mistake. A moment of weakness I have not repeated. I do not feel. It is a flaw my bloodline cannot afford. My heart is frozen, woman. It has been for centuries. Do not look for warmth where there is only ice. He turned to leave. His name is Leo, she called after him. Theron paused, his back to her. I know, he said, his voice barely a whisper. And then he was gone, leaving her alone with the crackling fire and the chilling finality of his words. The days that followed were a study in isolation. Ilara was a ghost in the castle. The servants were polite but distant, their eyes filled with suspicion. The court nobles ignored her completely, their whispers ceasing whenever she entered a room. She was the traitor who had birthed a prince, a scandal, a mystery they dissected in hushed tones. Leo, however, began to change. The nourishing food, the warmth of the castle, and the attention of the royal healers brought color to his cheeks. He was still small, but the persistent cough that had haunted their nights in the cabin began to fade. He was fascinated by the castle, by the knights in their shining armor and the vast library filled with stories. And he was fascinated by his father. Theron kept his distance, just as he had promised. He never came to their chambers again. But Ilara saw him watching. When Leo was in the training yard, attempting to lift a wooden sword far too heavy for him, she would see Theron standing on a distant balcony, a dark, solitary figure. When Leo was with his tutors, she would sometimes catch a glimpse of the king through a half-open door, listening, his face unreadable. He sent gifts, not to her, but to Leo. A small, masterfully carved wooden wolf, a pony of his own, a book of legends with beautiful illustrations. They were delivered by servants, with no card, no message. But Ilara knew. Her confusion grew. He claimed his heart was frozen, that he felt nothing. But his actions were a constant contradiction. Was this just duty? A king's obligation to his heir? Or was there something more, buried so deep beneath the ice that even he didn't recognize it? One evening, a chill set in that had nothing to do with the weather. Leo's breathing became ragged, his skin slick with a feverish sweat. The healers came, their faces grim. It was an old lung sickness, they said, one that often afflicted weaker pups in their first few years. They had thought him past the danger, but the mountain years had taken a deeper toll than they realized. Ilara sat by his bed for 2 days, wiping his brow, whispering to him, her own heart aching with every shallow breath he took. She refused to eat, refused to sleep. This was her fault. If she had been found sooner, if he had been raised in warmth and safety, he would be strong enough to fight this. On the 3rd night, when the healers had exhausted their remedies and could only offer grim, sympathetic glances, the door to her chambers opened silently. Theron stood there. His face was a mask of control, but his eyes were dark with a turmoil that mirrored her own. He walked to the bed and looked down at his son. Leo's small face was pale, his lips tinged with blue. They say there is nothing more to be done, Theron said, his voice rough. They're wrong, Alara whispered, her voice raw from lack of sleep and unshed tears. He's a fighter. He just he needs something more. Theron looked at her, at the dark circles under her eyes, the fierce, desperate hope that refused to be extinguished. He saw not the traitor, not the inconvenient mother of his heir, but a woman who would tear the world apart for her child. He reached out and laid his hand on Leo's forehead. His hand was large, calloused, a warrior's hand. But his touch was impossibly gentle. A strange, faint warmth seemed to emanate from his palm, a stark contrast to the icy persona he projected. It was a flicker of the man she remembered from that one night. Leo stirred under his touch, his breathing seeming to ease for just a moment. "Stay with him," Theron commanded, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He looked at her, his gaze intense. "Don't leave his side." He turned and left as silently as he had come. A moment later, a servant entered with a tray of hot broth and bread. Another followed with a thick, warm fur blanket, which she draped over Alara's shoulders. He was caring for her, in his own remote, unspoken way. He was telling her to be strong for their son. The realization sent a confusing warmth spreading through her chest, a dangerous spark of hope in the suffocating darkness of her fear. She looked at Leo, then at the empty doorway. She would not let their son die. She couldn't. The crisis passed. Leo's fever broke the next morning. By midday, he was sitting up, asking for water. The healers were astounded, calling it a miracle. But Alara knew. It was Theron's touch. That small, impossible warmth from the frozen king had been the push Leo needed to fight back. Her fragile peace was shattered a week later. She was in the gardens, a walled-off sanctuary of hardy winter roses and snow-dusted pines, watching Leo chase snowflakes. It was the first time he'd been allowed outside since his illness. His laughter was a sound she had desperately missed. A touching scene, the bastard and his whore mother playing in the snow. The voice was like silk sliding over a razor's edge. Alara turned, her body going rigid. Lord Valerius stood a few paces away, his hands clasped behind his back. He was the king's most trusted advisor, the same man who had condemned her 7 years ago. He hadn't aged a day, his face smooth and handsome, his smile holding no warmth at all. "My son is not a bastard," she said, her voice shaking slightly. She moved to stand in front of Leo, shielding him. Valerius's eyes glittered with amusement. "Is he not? Born of an unbonded traitor in the wilderness?" The court has other words for it. They wonder how long the king will tolerate this embarrassment. A runt heir who can barely draw a full breath. It weakens him. It weakens the throne. "Leave us alone," Alara said, her heart pounding. This man was poison. She could feel the wrongness of him, the ambition coiling behind his polite facade. "I only offer a friendly warning," Valerius said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The king is a creature of duty and logic. He has no heart, as you've surely discovered. Eventually, his logic will tell him that a weak, half-wild heir and his disgraced mother are a liability he cannot afford. He will set you aside. Perhaps he will find a stronger, more suitable queen to give him a proper heir." Every word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to find her deepest insecurities, her worthlessness, her fear of being cast out again. "You are the one who should be careful, Lord Valerius," a low voice growled from behind him. Valerius froze. Both he and Alara turned to see Theron standing at the edge of the garden path. His face was thunderous, his eyes chips of ice burning with a cold fire. He must have been on the battlements above, watching them. "Your Majesty," Valerius said, bowing smoothly, his composure impeccable. "I was merely welcoming the lady to the citadel." "I heard what you were doing," Theron said, his voice dangerously quiet. He walked toward them, his every step radiating menace. He stopped beside Alara, a formidable wall of protective fury. You are addressing my son's mother, the woman who will one day be this kingdom's queen. And you will show her the respect that title commands. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Queen. He had said queen. Valerius's mask slipped for a fraction of a second. A flash of pure, unadulterated hatred twisted his features before he smoothed it away. Of course, my king. A slip of the tongue. My apologies. It will not happen again, Theron stated. It was not a warning. It was a promise of swift and terrible consequences. He dismissed the advisor with a curt nod. Valerius bowed again and retreated, but not before casting one last venomous look at Ilara. The moment he was gone, the tension left Theron's shoulders. He looked down at Ilara, his expression unreadable once more. He will not bother you again, he said. Queen, she whispered, her mind reeling. You said, Queen? A flicker of something, regret, frustration, crossed his face. It was a necessary political statement to put him in his place. Oh? The hope that had flared in her chest died, turning to ash. Of course, it was a strategy. A move in a game she didn't understand. It had nothing to do with her. He is a dangerous man, Ilara, Theron said, his voice low. He has my ear, and the loyalty of half the court. Be wary of him. It was the first time he had used her name since her return. The sound of it on his lips was a strange mix of pain and pleasure. He is the one who framed me, she said, the words tumbling out. 7 years ago, it was him. Theron looked at her, his gaze searching. You have no proof. I have the truth, she insisted, her frustration boiling over. Why won't you believe me? Because belief is an emotion, he said, his voice flat and final. And I have none to spare. Stay away from him. Keep the boy close. That is all I ask. He turned and walked away, leaving her shivering in the cold, the word queen echoing in the silent air. A promise and a lie, all at once. The king's public declaration had consequences. Valerius and his faction grew colder, their whispers more pointed. But others, those loyal to the throne above all, began to offer Ilara hesitant nods of respect. She was no longer just the traitor, she was the potential queen. The weight of it was terrifying. Theron remained as distant as ever, the wall of ice between them firmly in place. Yet, the small contradictory moments continued. A book of mountain folklore left outside her door. A rare, sweet-tasting tea sent to her chambers on a particularly cold night. A quiet order to the guards to double their watch on her and Leo. He was protecting her, providing for her, all while refusing to acknowledge the growing tension between them. She started to see the immense burden he carried. He rarely slept, spending his nights in the strategy room, maps and troop movements spread across the massive table. He ruled a vast, harsh kingdom, beset by rival pacts and political intrigue. He was utterly alone in his power, the frozen heart he spoke of a necessary shield against a world of threats. She realized with a pang of sorrow that he wasn't just cold. He was lonely, a loneliness so profound and ancient it had become part of his very being. The annual Great Hunt was announced, a tradition meant to honor the pack's strength and secure meat for the coming winter. A grand camp was to be set up in the royal hunting grounds, deep in the Silverwood. It was a time of celebration and ritual. A royal decree was issued. Prince Leo would attend his first great hunt to observe from the safety of the camp. It was a symbolic step, presenting the heir to the pack's strongest warriors. Ilara was filled with a sense of deep foreboding. The hunting grounds were near her old packlands. It was Valerius's territory, his power base. It felt like walking into a trap. She voiced her concerns to Theron, finding him late one night in the armory, sharpening a massive broadsword. It's too dangerous, she said, her voice small in the vast echoing chamber. Valerius will be there. Theron didn't stop his work, the rhythmic scrape of stone on steel filling the silence. He will be protected. I will see to it myself. Theron, please, she begged, stepping closer. Don't take him. My heart. It tells me something is wrong. He finally stopped, setting the whetstone down. He turned to face her, his eyes shadowed in the torchlight. And my duty tells me my heir must be seen. He must be accepted by the alphas. To hide him is to admit he is weak. I will not do it. This isn't about strength. It's about his life. His life is my concern, he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. I will not let anyone harm him. You have my word. His certainty was absolute, but it did nothing to soothe the cold knot of fear in her stomach. She saw the trap closing around them, and the king, blinded by duty and logic, was walking right into it. The hunting camp was a small city of pavilions and campfires under the dark boughs of the silverwood. The air was thick with the scent of pine and roasting meat, the sound of boisterous laughter from the assembled warriors. But to Alara, the atmosphere was menacing. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every friendly face a mask. Valerius was in his element here, moving among the warriors, sharing wine, his influence palpable. He paid Alara and Leo a curt, formal respect, his eyes holding a triumphant gleam that made her skin crawl. On the second day, the main hunt began. Theron, magnificent in black leather and fur, prepared to lead the party. He came to their pavilion before he left. Stay inside the camp perimeter, he instructed Alara. Leo is not to leave your sight. Leo looked up at his father, his eyes wide with hero worship. Can I come? I want to see you hunt the great stag. Theron's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly as he looked at his son. He knelt, a shocking gesture for a king, bringing himself down to Leo's level. One day you will lead the hunt, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. But today, your duty is to stay here and protect your mother. He placed a hand on Leo's head, a brief, possessive gesture. Then he looked at Alara, his stormy eyes holding hers for a long moment. It felt like a warning, a promise, and a farewell. All at once. Then he was gone, swallowed by the press of warriors. Hours passed. Alara's anxiety grew with each passing minute. The sounds of the hunt, distant horns, the baying of wolves, echoed through the forest. It happened suddenly. A cry went up from the edge of the camp. A stag, a magnificent beast with a rack of antlers like a thorny crown, had been driven back towards the river, cornered. It was a rare event, a prize to be claimed by the king himself. Caught up in the excitement, the camp guards rushed toward the riverbank to witness the kill. Leo, his father's words about the great stag ringing in his ears, slipped his hand from Alara's and darted after them. Leo! She screamed, her heart seizing. She ran after him, pushing through the throng of people. She saw him at the edge of the clearing, standing near a thicket of trees, trying to get a better view. And she saw the other thing, too. A flash of movement in the trees behind him. A man, his face masked, drawing a crossbow. It wasn't aimed at the stag. It was aimed at her son. Time seemed to slow. She screamed his name, a raw, desperate sound. Theron was there, 50 yards away, moving in for the kill on the stag. But he heard her. His head snapped up, his senses, honed by centuries of battle, instantly registering the new threat. He saw the assassin, saw the crossbow aimed at his son. He didn't hesitate. He abandoned the stag, abandoning the ritual, abandoning everything. He moved with a speed that was not quite human, a blur of black leather and fury. The crossbow fired. The bolt, short and black-tipped, flew through the air. Alara saw it all in perfect, horrifying clarity. The bolt would hit Leo. There was no time. But Theron was faster. He threw himself in front of his son, a human shield. The bolt slammed into his side just below his ribs with a sickening thud. Theron grunted, a deep guttural sound of pain. He stumbled but did not fall. He turned, his eyes blazing with a light that was pure, murderous rage, and hurled a hunting knife. The assassin dropped from the tree with a choked cry, the blade buried in his throat. Then Theron's strength gave out. His legs buckled. He crashed to his knees, his hand pressed to his side. When he pulled it away, his fingers were coated in blood that was unnaturally dark, almost black. Silver. The bolt was tipped with silver. And something else. A faint, dark smoke curled from the wound. Poison. He collapsed onto the forest floor. Chaos erupted. Guards swarmed the fallen assassin. Warriors rushed to their fallen king. Ilara ran, her legs pumping. Her world narrowed to the sight of him lying broken on the ground. She fell to her knees beside him, gathering Leo into her arms. Theron's eyes were glazed with pain, his breathing shallow. A creeping frost was spreading from the wound, his skin turning deathly pale, his lips blue. The poison was unnaturally fast, unnaturally cold. "Theron!" she cried, her hand hovering over the wound, afraid to touch him. He looked at her, his gaze clearing for a moment. He wasn't looking at her, but through her. "Get him away," he rasped, his voice a thread of sound. "Valerius. Take the boy. Run." His strength failed him. His eyes rolled back in his head, and a tremor ran through his massive frame. The frost spread faster, encasing his torso in a thin, glittering sheet of ice. His heart was slowing, the life fading from him. The royal healers pushed through the crowd, their faces etched with panic. They took one look at the wound, at the black blood and the encroaching ice, and recoiled. "Blackroot poison, laced with silver," one of them whispered in horror. "There is no cure. It freezes the heart of a wolf from the inside out. He is lost." Lost. The word slammed into Ilara with the force of a physical blow. No, she would not accept it. She looked at Theron's face, peaceful now, like a stone effigy. The frozen king was becoming literally frozen. She looked at Leo, who was sobbing, his small hands clutching her arm. She saw the man who had shielded her son with his own body, the man who left blankets by her door and books for his son, the man whose loneliness mirrored her own. He was not just a king. He was Leo's father. He was hers. In some way she couldn't name, in some way that went beyond bonds and laws. He was hers. A fire ignited inside her, a rage so pure and hot it burned away her fear. It burned away the years of solitude and self-doubt. It burned away the brand of traitor and worthless. She would not let him die. She pushed the healers aside. She placed her hands on his chest, right over his slowly freezing heart. The cold was shocking. A deep, soul-stealing cold that bit at her fingers. She closed her eyes and poured everything she was into her hands. Her love for Leo, her desperate, unspoken feelings for this impossible man, her grief, her rage, her own life force. She imagined a fire, a sun, a star being born between her palms. "No," she whispered, the word a prayer, a command, a declaration of war against death itself. "You will not take him. I will not let you." Something inside her broke. A dam she never knew existed shattered, and a flood of power, warm and golden, surged through her veins. It was not her power. It was life itself, a torrent of pure, untamed energy. It erupted from her hands, a blinding golden light that pushed back the shadows of the forest. The ice on Theron's chest hissed, steaming and melting under her touch. The light poured into him, a river of gold flowing into the black veins of the poison. It was a battle of light against dark, of warmth against cold, happening right there, under her hands. She felt his heart stutter, once, twice. Then, it beat. A slow, strong, steady rhythm. The color began to return to his face. The blue tinge of his lips faded, replaced by a healthy red. The frost receded, vanquished by the impossible warmth radiating from her. She gasped, the effort draining her, leaving her dizzy and weak. The light faded, and she slumped forward, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady, miraculous thump of his heart. A collective gasp came from the crowd around them. They stared, their faces a mixture of terror and awe. They had just witnessed something that did not exist in their world. Magic. Theron's eyes fluttered open. They were no longer the color of a winter storm. The ice was gone. They were molten gold, clear and bright, and they were filled with a startling, raw emotion. He could feel, for the first time in centuries, the seal on his heart, a curse of his bloodline, was broken. Her magic had not just healed his body, it had shattered the prison around his soul. He felt everything. The lingering cold of the poison, the warmth of her hands on his chest. The bond, the mate bond he had suppressed and denied for 7 years, now roaring to life like a supernova in his chest. He felt his love for his son, a fierce, protective wave that threatened to drown him. And he felt a dawning, overwhelming, terrifying love for the woman who had just saved his life. "Ilara," he breathed, his voice hoarse. She lifted her head, her eyes wide, her face stained with tears. He reached up, his hand cupping her cheek, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her. "It was always you," he whispered. His gaze shifted, moving past her to the crowd. His eyes, now glowing with golden alpha power, found Lord Valerius, who was standing at the back, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His plan had not just failed, it had unleashed something he could never have predicted. "Seize him!" Theron roared, his voice booming with renewed power. The royal guards, who had been frozen in shock, snapped to attention. They descended on Valerius, who didn't even try to run. He simply stared at Ilara, at the faint golden aura still clinging to her, and knew he was finished. Theron pushed himself into a sitting position. He pulled Ilara into his arms, holding her tightly, his face buried in her hair. He held her as if he was afraid she might disappear, a lifeline in a sudden, overwhelming sea of feeling. "Forgive me," he murmured against her skin. "I was blind. I was a fool." She clung to him, her strength gone, sobbing with relief and shock. He was alive. He was warm. The ice was gone. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his golden eyes searching hers. "I am saying that I love you," he said, the words clumsy, new on his tongue. "And I will spend the rest of my very long life proving it." In front of the entire hunt, in front of his warriors and his alphas, the Alpha King kissed his exiled mate, sealing his promise not with a royal decree, but with the pure, undeniable truth of his newly awakened heart. 3 months later, the snow fell thick and heavy outside the windows of the royal chambers. But inside, a fire crackled, casting a warm orange glow over the room. Ilara sat on a plush rug before the hearth, leaning back against Theron's chest as he sat in a large armchair. His arms were wrapped around her, his chin resting on top of her head. Leo was asleep in his own room down the hall, his breathing even and strong. He was thriving, growing taller every day, his laughter a constant, welcome sound in the once silent halls of the Citadel. Valerius had confessed to everything. The murder of the Alpha's daughter 7 years ago, the framing of Ilara, the assassination attempt on Leo. His ambition had been to destabilize the throne, to remove the unfeeling king and his surprisingly resilient heir, and to seize power for himself. He now resided in the deepest, darkest cell of the Citadel's dungeon, stripped of his title and his influence. Ilara was queen. Not by political necessity, but by a bonding ceremony that had been witnessed by the entire kingdom. The whispers had died, replaced by awe and respect. She was the healer queen, the woman whose love had broken the bloodline's ancient curse and saved their king. Her own power was a quiet, constant warmth inside her now. It flowed from her touch, mending the small hurts of her son, easing the deep weariness in her husband, and bringing a sense of life and peace to the once cold stone of the castle. "What are you thinking about?" Theron's voice was a low rumble against her ear. It was a voice that was still learning to express tenderness, but every word was saturated with it. "I'm thinking about a cold cabin in the mountains," she whispered. "And a little boy with a cough." His arms tightened around her. "I can never erase those years for you. The hardship, the fear." She turned her head, looking up at him. His face, once so harsh and remote, was softened by the firelight and by love. The golden light in his eyes was a constant, steady flame. "You don't have to erase them," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "They made me who I am. They made me strong enough to find you." He leaned down and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss filled with the quiet certainty of a lifetime stretching before them. It was a kiss that held the memory of cold and the promise of unending warmth. She had been the exiled Omega, the traitor, the worthless one. He had been the frozen king, the untouchable, the emotionally dead. They had been two broken halves of a whole they didn't know existed. She had saved him from his icy prison. He had saved her from the wilderness. Together, they had built a new world from the ashes of the old, a kingdom founded not just on power, but on a love that had been strong enough to defy death itself. Outside, the winter raged on, but here, in the heart of the citadel, they had finally found their home.